Snow falls softly outside the towering windows of the Blackwood mansion on New York's Upper East Side, but inside, the temperature is rising. Crystal glasses clink as 20 of Manhattan's elite gather around the magnificent mahogany dining table for Christmas Eve dinner. At the head of the table sits Victoria Blackwood, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her emerald dinner dress worth more than most people's yearly salary. Her son, Alexander, slouches in his chair, already on his third glass of wine. At 32, he's the youngest CEO on Wall Street, known as much for his ruthless business tactics as his playboy lifestyle. The Christmas tree behind him sparkles with ornaments worth a small fortune, but his expression remains bored, detached. "A toast," Victoria announces, rising from her chair with a grace that turns heads. The room falls silent. To family, to fortune, and to... She pauses, her eyes finding Alexander's with laser focus. To changes that will shape our future. Something in her tone makes Alexander sit up straighter. He knows his mother. Every word she speaks is calculated, precise. "But before we drink," Victoria continues, her voice carrying an edge that slices through the festive atmosphere, "I have an announcement that cannot wait." She reaches into her clutch and pulls out a thick envelope. "Alexander, darling, this concerns you most of all." Alexander's fingers tighten around his wine glass. The last time his mother made an announcement at dinner, she donated half her art collection to charity, pieces he'd been counting on inheriting. "As you all know, my late husband built this family's fortune from nothing. He understood the value of hard work, of compassion." Victoria's eyes sweep the room. "Something I fear our younger generation has forgotten." Alexander feels the weight of disapproving glances from the dinner guests. His cheeks burn. "Therefore," Victoria's voice grows stronger, "I've made a decision. Alexander will marry within 24 hours, or he will be removed from his position as CEO and lose his inheritance." Gasps ripple through the room. Alexander's wineglass slips from his fingers, spilling red across the white tablecloth like blood. "Mother, this is insane," he sputters, rising to his feet. "You can't. I can and I will." Victoria's voice cuts like steel. "But there's more. I've chosen your bride." The room holds its breath. Alexander's heart pounds against his ribs. Her name is Sarah Matthews. She currently resides at the Hope Harbor homeless shelter on 28th Street. The silence shatters. Ladies fan themselves, whispering behind manicured hands. A prominent banker chokes on his wine. "A homeless woman?" Alexander's voice rises, hysteria edging in. "This is a joke, right? Some kind of twisted Christmas lesson?" Victoria remains unmoved. "Sarah Matthews has lived at that shelter for the past year, helping others while owning nothing herself. She has shown more character in 1 year than you have in your entire privileged life." Alexander's legs feel weak. He grabs the back of his chair for support. "You're trying to ruin me." "No, darling." Victoria's expression softens slightly. "I'm trying to save you." "The papers are drawn up. You have until midnight tomorrow, Christmas Day, to marry Sarah Matthews, or everything goes to charity. Your choice." She slides the envelope across the table. It stops in front of Alexander, who stares at it as if it might explode. "But why?" his voice cracks. "Why her? Why now?" Victoria's eyes glitter with something unreadable. "Perhaps, my son, that's the first right question you've asked in years." She raises her glass. "Now, shall we drink to new beginnings?" Alexander stands frozen, his world crumbling around him as the guests awkwardly raise their glasses. The Christmas lights seem to mock him, twinkling against the darkness outside. In 24 hours, he must marry a homeless woman he's never met, or lose everything he's ever known. But as he looks at his mother's resolute expression, a chilling thought strikes him. She's planned this, every detail. She chose Sarah Matthews specifically. But why? What isn't she telling him about this mysterious woman from the shelter? The snow continues to fall outside, covering Manhattan in a deceptive blanket of peace. While inside the Blackwood mansion, the real storm is just beginning. Will Victoria's ultimatum destroy her son's life, or save his soul? Continue watching to discover the shocking truth. The Hope Harbor homeless shelter stands like a humble guardian among Manhattan's towering skyscrapers. Alexander's Ferrari looks obscenely out of place as he parks it in the snow-covered lot. It's barely dawn on Christmas morning, and his head pounds from too much wine and too little sleep. Inside, the shelter buzzes with unexpected warmth and activity. The aroma of fresh coffee mingles with the scent of pine from a modest Christmas tree. A group of volunteers serves breakfast to the shelter's residents. Their cheerful voices a stark contrast to the tense silence of last night's dinner party. "Sarah? She's in the kitchen," an elderly volunteer tells him, eyeing his tailored suit with curiosity. "Been up since 4, making sure everyone gets a proper Christmas breakfast." Alexander follows the sound of someone humming Silent Night. He stops in the kitchen doorway, his rehearsed speech dying on his lips. Sarah Matthews stands at an industrial stove, expertly flipping pancakes while giving instructions to 2 volunteers. Her dark hair is pulled back in a practical braid, her clothes simple but immaculate. There's something in her posture, the way she moves, that catches his attention. This isn't what he expected. "The secret is to wait for the tiny bubbles before you flip them," she's saying, her voice carrying the unmistakable polish of an expensive education. "Mrs. Harrison loves them extra fluffy." "Excuse me?" Alexander clears his throat. "Sarah Matthews?" She turns and he's struck by her eyes. Intelligent, assessing, and somehow familiar. She studies him with the kind of confidence that comes from old money, not the streets. "Let me guess," she says, handing the spatula to a volunteer. "Alexander Blackwood. Victoria said you'd come." Her lips curve in a slight smile. "Though I admit I expected you a bit later. It is Christmas morning after all." Alexander blinks, thrown off balance. "You know who I am. Your mother called last night." Sarah wipes her hands on her apron, revealing delicate fingers that have clearly never known hard labor. Quite an interesting proposal she had. "Look," Alexander steps closer, lowering his voice. "I don't know what game my mother's playing, but we both know this is insane. I can make it worth your while to..." "To what?" Sarah's smile disappears. "Take your money and disappear. Is that how you solve all your problems, Mr. Blackwood?" A young girl tugs at Sarah's sleeve. "Miss Sarah, Tommy's crying again. He misses his mom." "I'll be right there, sweetie." Sarah's whole demeanor softens. She turns back to Alexander, her voice firm. "Some things can't be bought. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have people who need me." "Wait!" Alexander grabs her arm as she passes. "You don't understand. I'll lose everything if we don't marry by midnight." Sarah gently removes his hand. "Perhaps losing everything is exactly what you need." Her eyes meet his, challenging. "Your mother told me about you, about your life, the parties, the women, the way you treat people who work for you." "She doesn't know me," Alexander protests. But the words sound hollow even to him. "Doesn't she?" Sarah raises an eyebrow. "Tell me, Mr. Blackwood, when was the last time you did something that didn't benefit you directly? When did you last think about someone else's needs before your own?" Before he can answer, crying echoes from down the hall. Sarah's expression softens with genuine concern. "That's Tommy. His mother's in the hospital. Cancer. He's spending Christmas here while she gets treatment." She looks at Alexander pointedly. "Some people have real problems, Mr. Blackwood. Your trust fund isn't one of them." "I can help," he blurts out. "The shelter, Tommy's mother, whatever you need, just marry me and I'll make sure they're all taken care of." Sarah stops at the door, her expression unreadable. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't about money. It never was." She shakes her head. "My answer is no, Mr. Blackwood. Some things are worth more than gold." As she walks away, Alexander notices something that makes his breath catch. A small scar behind her left ear, identical to one his mother has. His mind races back to old family photos, to whispered conversations he wasn't meant to hear. Suddenly, his mother's choice of Sarah Matthews doesn't seem random at all. There's something else going on here, something that makes his trust fund look trivial in comparison. Outside, church bells begin to ring, marking the first hour of Christmas Day. 23 hours left, and Alexander Blackwood is beginning to realize he's stumbled into a mystery much deeper than a simple ultimatum. Drop A if you think there's more to Sarah's story than meets the eye. Alexander bursts into his mother's study, still reeling from his encounter with Sarah. Victoria sits at her mahogany desk, calmly reviewing documents as if she hasn't just upended everyone's lives. Morning light streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. The scar behind her ear, Alexander says without preamble. It's identical to yours. Victoria looks up slowly, her expression unreadable. So you noticed. Faster than I expected. Who is she, Mother? Really? Alexander's voice shakes. Because that woman at the shelter, she's not just some random homeless person. The way she speaks, how she carries herself. Sit down, Alexander. Victoria gestures to the leather chair across from her desk. It's time you learned the truth about Sarah Matthews and about your father. Alexander sinks into the chair, his heart pounding. Victoria rises and walks to the wall of family photographs, stopping at one taken 25 years ago. She touches it gently. Your father wasn't always the successful man you knew, she begins. Before Blackwood Enterprises, before all this, she gestures around the opulent room. He had a different life and a different family. Alexander's throat tightens. What are you saying? Sarah's mother was your father's first wife. Victoria's words land like bombs in the quiet room. They married young, had Sarah when they were barely 20. But then Catherine, Sarah's mother, got sick. The medical bills. She turns to face Alexander, her eyes glistening. Your father couldn't afford the treatments. He made a choice, a terrible, desperate choice. He left them, started over, met me. My family's connections helped him build everything you see now. Alexander stands abruptly, knocking over his chair. Sarah is my sister, and you knew, and all this time. Half-sister, Victoria corrects softly. And yes, I knew. I've always known. Your father swore me to secrecy. He sent them money, anonymously, but it was too late. Catherine died when Sarah was 12. So why now? Alexander demands. Why this whole marriage ultimatum charade? Victoria's expression hardens. Because Sarah deserves better than anonymous checks. Because you need to understand the price of the privilege you take for granted. And because, she hesitates, your father made me promise on his deathbed to make things right. By forcing us to marry? That's sick, Mother. Of course not, Victoria snaps. The marriage ultimatum was a way to force you to meet her, to see who she really is. I needed you to understand what real character looks like. Sarah gave up everything, her trust fund, her inheritance, to help others. While you... She lets the words hang. Alexander paces the room, his world spinning. If she's my sister, why is she living in a shelter? Why didn't she claim her inheritance when father died? Because she doesn't know. Victoria's voice drops to nearly a whisper. She thinks her father was Thomas Matthews, a man Catherine married after your father left. The scar, it's from an accident they both had as children. Before your father left, Sarah was too young to remember. Alexander stops pacing. So she has no idea who she really is. Who I am to her. No, and you can't tell her. Victoria's voice turns urgent. Not yet. There's more to this story, Alexander, much more. Things even I didn't know until recently. Like what? Victoria moves to her desk, pulling out an old photograph. Like the fact that Sarah's adoptive father, Thomas Matthews, was one of the most successful venture capitalists in Boston. When he died last year, he left Sarah his entire fortune. Billions, Alexander. But she walked away from it all. Changed her name back to Matthews from her married name, and disappeared. Married name? Alexander feels like he's drowning in revelations. Yes, she was married to James Preston III. The Preston family practically owns half of Boston. Victoria's eyes meet his. She left him too, left everything. No one in those circles knows where she went, except me. How did you find her? I've had people watching her whole life, making sure she was safe. When she walked away from her fortune, from her marriage, I knew it was time. Victoria hands him the photograph. Look closely. It's a picture of a young Sarah in a Harvard graduation gown, standing next to a distinguished-looking man. They're both beaming at the camera. The man's face hits Alexander like a physical blow. That's Mr. Harrison, from the board of directors. Yes, Victoria nods. Thomas Matthews and Robert Harrison were best friends in college. Robert's been keeping an eye on Sarah for years, at my request. He's the one who told me when she started working at Hope Harbor. Alexander stares at the photo, his mind racing. There's something you're still not telling me. You're right. Victoria returns to her desk. But that will have to wait. Right now you need to go back to that shelter. Not as the arrogant CEO she met this morning, but as someone worthy of knowing the truth, someone worthy of being her brother. And the marriage ultimatum? Victoria's lips curve in a small smile. Consider it void. But Alexander? Her voice turns serious. What you do next matters more than you know. Sarah isn't just your sister. She's the key to everything, past and future. Choose your next steps carefully. As Alexander turns to leave, still clutching the photograph, Victoria calls after him. One more thing. Look up the Preston Foundation's major donations from last year. Pay special attention to Hope Harbor Shelter. Alexander pauses at the door, a chill running down his spine as the pieces start falling into place. The shelter, the Prestons, his father's past, Sarah's choice to walk away from billions. Nothing about this is random. And somehow he knows it all leads back to Christmas Eve, 25 years ago, the night everything changed for both Blackwood families. Share your thoughts. Was Victoria right to keep this secret for so long? Comment below. Snow falls harder as Alexander returns to Hope Harbor, armed with knowledge that changes everything. The shelter's Christmas lunch is in full swing, volunteers serving turkey and ham to a packed dining room. He finds Sarah in a quiet corner, reading The Night Before Christmas to Tommy and several other children. Her voice changes for each character, bringing the story to life. The children lean in, entranced, their faces bright with wonder. For a moment, Alexander sees past his newfound knowledge to the simple beauty of the scene. His sister, though she doesn't know it, giving these children a moment of joy on Christmas Day. Mr. Blackwood, Sarah looks up as the story ends. Back so soon. The children scatter, leaving them alone in the corner. I need to show you something, he says, pulling out his phone. He opens the Preston Foundation's donation records from last year. Specifically, this. Sarah's face pales as she sees the screen. There it is, a $50 million donation to Hope Harbor Shelter, made anonymously but traceable to the Preston Foundation, her foundation, before she walked away. How did you know? Alexander's voice is gentle. That Sarah Matthews, the humble shelter volunteer, was once Sarah Preston, wife of James Preston III, and controller of a billion-dollar charitable foundation. She stands abruptly, grabbing his arm. Not here! She leads him through the shelter's back door into a small garden, now covered in snow. A statue of St. Francis stands guard over empty flower beds. You've done your homework, she says, crossing her arms. What else do you think you know? I know that Thomas Matthews, the man who raised you, was one of Boston's most successful venture capitalists. I know you graduated summa cum laude from Harvard, married into the Preston family, and ran their charitable foundation. He pauses. What I don't know is why you left it all behind. Sarah stares at the statue, snow collecting on her shoulders. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who have everything, watching them decide the fate of those who have nothing? Her voice carries an edge of bitter memory. The Preston Foundation's board meetings were like that. Wealthy people patting themselves on the back for their generosity while making sure their charity never threatened their position at the top. She turns to face him. One night I was at a gala, crystal champagne flutes, $1,000 plates, all to raise money for homeless shelters. The irony was suffocating. Do you know how many people we could have helped with just the cost of that party? So you left? Alexander asks. Walked away from billions because of one hypocritical gala. No, Sarah's eyes flash. I left because I realized I was becoming exactly what I despised. James, my ex-husband, he wanted to turn the foundation into a tax shelter, use it to protect his family's wealth while pretending to help people. And I almost agreed, because it was easier, because I was comfortable. She walks to a snow-covered bench, brushing it off and sitting down. The night I left, I went to one of the shelters we funded, sat with a woman my age, listened to her story. She had an MBA just like me, but her husband died. Medical bills wiped them out, and suddenly, Sarah's voice catches, I realized how thin the line is between having everything and having nothing. Alexander sits beside her. But why this shelter? Why live like this when you could do so much more with your wealth? Sarah laughs softly. That's exactly what James said, what everyone said, but they don't understand. It's not about the money. It's about being real, about actually helping people instead of just talking about it at charity galas. She reaches into her pocket, pulls out a worn photo. This was my mother, my real mother, Catherine. Alexander's heart stops, seeing his father's first wife for the first time. She taught me that true wealth isn't about what you have, it's about what you give. When she died, we were poor, but she'd spent her life helping others. That was her legacy to me. And now, Alexander asks carefully, the marriage proposal from the Blackwoods, what Victoria's offering, you could do even more good with those resources. Sarah stands, agitated. Don't you see? It's not about having more resources. The world doesn't need more rich people deciding how to help the poor. It needs people willing to get their hands dirty, to see the real problems, to actually be there. But no, she cuts him off. Your mother's proposal isn't about helping people. It's about something else. I can feel it. There's something she's not telling us, something about why it has to be me. Alexander's throat tightens, knowing the truth, but unable to speak it. Sarah continues, pacing in the snow. Besides, I made a promise. To Tommy's mother, to everyone here. I won't abandon them to return to that world of artificial charity and social climbing. I won't. She stops suddenly, staring at something behind Alexander. He turns to see Victoria Blackwood standing in the garden doorway, her face grave. I think, Victoria says quietly, it's time you both knew the whole truth. About Christmas Eve, 25 years ago, about your father, Sarah, your real father. Sarah's face drains of color. What are you talking about? My father was Thomas Matthews. No! Victoria's voice carries the weight of decades of secrets. Your father was Richard Blackwood, and this story began long before either of you were born. The snow falls silently around them. Three people bound by secrets finally rising to the surface as Christmas Day moves toward a revelation that will change everything they thought they knew about family, wealth, and the true meaning of legacy. The real reason Sarah left her fortune will break your heart. Subscribe to find out why. Victoria leads them to a small office at the back of the shelter. Certificates on the wall bear Sarah's name. Awards for her work with the homeless. A lifetime of service reduced to paper acknowledgements that can't begin to capture the lives she's changed. Before I tell you everything, Victoria says, closing the door, you need to understand why I chose today, Christmas. It wasn't just for dramatic effect. She pulls an old envelope from her purse, yellowed with age. This arrived yesterday. From your father's lawyers, to be delivered 25 years after his death. Alexander stares at his sister, the words still new and strange in his mind. Sarah stands rigid, her world crumbling with each revelation. Richard Blackwood at my father. Sarah's voice trembles. No, you're lying. Thomas Matthews raised me. He was my father. Thomas Matthews was a good man, Victoria agrees softly. He loved you like his own, but he knew the truth. Your mother told him everything before they married. Why? Sarah's question cuts like a blade. Why? Tell me now. Victoria opens the envelope with shaking hands. Because of this, your father's final confession and his last request. She removes several pages, the paper crisp despite its age. Richard knew he was dying. He wrote this the night before, Christmas Eve. Alexander finishes. The night he made you promise to make things right. Victoria nods. He left specific instructions. The truth could only be revealed after 25 years, and only if certain conditions were met. She looks at Sarah intently. You had to prove yourself worthy of both fortunes, the Blackwoods and the Matthews. Worthy? Sarah's laugh is bitter. I walked away from fortune. How does that make me worthy? Exactly. Victoria's eyes shine. Richard's greatest shame wasn't leaving you and your mother. It was what wealth did to him, how it corrupted him, made him forget his humanity. He wanted to ensure his legacy wouldn't destroy both his children. She hands the letter to Sarah, who takes it with trembling hands. Read it, both of you. Sarah begins reading aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. My dearest Sarah, by now you know the truth of your birth and of my greatest failing. When I left you and your mother, it wasn't just for money. I was running from the man I'd become, someone who believed wealth could justify any action, heal any wound. Your mother, Catherine, understood what I never could, that true wealth lies in how we touch others' lives. I watched from afar as she raised you with this truth, even in poverty, and I watched you grow into someone far better than I ever was. To Alexander, my son, who never knew his sister, I pray you're reading this together. The divide I created between you was my darkest sin, but perhaps in bridging it, you can both find what I lost. The understanding that family, love, and purpose matter more than all the wealth in the world. My final request is this. The combined fortunes of the Blackwood and Matthews estates must be unified, but not through marriage, through siblinghood, through the kind of bond that transcends blood and reaches into the heart of what family truly means. Victoria, my dear wife, you knew this day would come. The charade of the marriage ultimatum was your idea, a way to bring them together without revealing the truth until they were ready. Until they had both proven themselves worthy of the legacy I left behind, Sarah walked away from fortune to serve others. Alexander, my son, I hope you've learned to see beyond the wealth that blinded me for so long. The choice now lies with both of you. The combined fortunes, properly used, could transform countless lives. But only if you work together, balancing Sarah's heart for service with Alexander's business acumen, or you can walk away. The entire estate will go to charity, divided among the causes Sarah has served so faithfully. The choice must be unanimous, and it must be made today, Christmas Day, when I was finally brave enough to write this letter. With all my love and deepest regrets, Richard Blackwood. Silence fills the small office. Sarah sinks into a chair, the letter falling from her hands. Alexander picks it up, rereading passages, his mind racing. The marriage ultimatum, he says finally, looking at his mother. It was never real. You needed a way to get us together, to force us to see each other as we really are. Victoria nods. Sarah's work here, her choice to walk away from wealth, it proved she had your mother's heart, Catherine. And you, Alexander, watching you today, seeing how meeting Sarah changed you, you proved you could overcome your father's greatest weakness. The belief that money solves everything. But now what? Sarah's voice is barely a whisper. You want us to take control of both fortunes after everything I've done to escape that world? No, Alexander says suddenly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Not control, stewardship. He kneels beside his sister's chair. Sarah, think about it. What you've done here at the shelter. Imagine doing it on a global scale. Not from some high tower, but from right here in the trenches, where it matters. With you? Sarah meets his eyes. The corporate raider who destroys small businesses for profit? The brother, he corrects softly, who finally understands what his sister knew all along, that wealth is only worth something if it serves a greater purpose. Sarah stands, walking to the window. Snow still falls outside, coating the world in clean white possibility. Through the glass, she can see Tommy helping serve Christmas dinner to new shelter arrivals. "If we do this," she says finally, "we do it my way. No galas, no vanity charities. Real change, from the ground up. Our way," Alexander corrects, joining her at the window. "Your heart, my head, just like Father hoped." Victoria watches her children, together at last, seeing in them the redemption Richard had dreamed of. "The choice must be unanimous," she reminds them softly, "and it must be made today." Brother and sister turn from the window, facing each other in the growing dusk of Christmas Day. In their faces, the weight of the past meets the possibility of the future, as they prepare to make a decision that will change not only their lives, but countless others. The true meaning of their father's legacy and their own hangs in the balance. Like if you believe money can't buy true happiness. Evening shadows lengthen across Hope Harbor's dining room as Alexander stands before the assembled residents and volunteers. Gone is the arrogant CEO from this morning. In his place stands a man humbled by revelation and transformed by understanding. "For years," he begins, his voice carrying across the hushed room, "I thought I knew what success looked like. Power, money, control." He looks at Sarah, who watches from beside Tommy's chair. "I was wrong." He pulls out his phone, pressing a few buttons. "I've just transferred $10 million to Hope Harbor's account. Not as charity, as investment in humanity." Murmurs ripple through the crowd, but he raises his hand. "But money alone isn't the answer. I learned that today from my sister." The word sister causes Sarah to catch her breath. It's the first time he's said it aloud. "So I'm not just giving money," Alexander continues. "I'm giving myself. Starting tomorrow, I'm stepping down as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises. Instead, I'll be working here, learning from Sarah, understanding what real value looks like." Victoria, standing in the doorway, presses her hand to her heart. But there's more to come. "And one more thing." Alexander turns to Tommy's mother, pale and thin in her wheelchair, brought from the hospital for Christmas dinner. "The best oncology team in New York is waiting at Memorial Sloan Kettering. Your treatment starts tomorrow, fully funded. Not as charity, as an investment in Tommy's future. Because that's what family does." Tommy runs to hug him, and Alexander lifts the boy easily, tears shining in his eyes. Sarah watches, her own vision blurring, as her brother, this stranger who shares her blood, demonstrates a transformation she never thought possible. "You planned this," Sarah says later, joining Victoria in the shelter's small chapel. "All of it, not just bringing us together, but teaching us both what we needed to learn." Victoria lights a candle, its flame flickering in the darkness. "I had 25 years to plan, my dear, but even I couldn't predict how perfectly you would both rise to the occasion." "What do you mean?" "Alexander needed to learn that wealth without purpose is meaningless. You needed to learn that rejecting wealth entirely meant rejecting its power to create real change." Victoria turns to face her stepdaughter. "But there's more. Something even Richard didn't know when he wrote that letter." She reaches into her purse, withdrawing another envelope. "This is why I chose Hope Harbor. Why it had to be this shelter this Christmas." Sarah opens the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside is a faded photograph, a young Catherine, her mother, standing in front of a building. Her heart stops. It's Hope Harbor, but decades ago. "Your mother founded this shelter," Victoria says softly, "before she got sick, before everything fell apart. Richard never knew. It was her secret dream, funded with the last of her savings. After she died, it passed through various charities until the Preston Foundation bought it last year," Sarah whispers. "My foundation, I never knew. I was drawn here, but I never knew why." "Because some things are written in our souls, Sarah. Your mother's spirit of service, your father's business acumen. You and Alexander each got half of what you needed. Apart, you were incomplete. Together, we can fulfill both legacies," Sarah finishes, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That's why you had me run the Preston Foundation first, isn't it? Learning the business side, preparing me for this moment." Victoria smiles mysteriously. "Everything that happened, Your marriage to James Preston, Alexander's rise in the company, even Tommy's mother arriving here. It was all part of a tapestry, 25 years in the weaving. But why? Why go to such lengths? Because true transformation can't be forced, Victoria says, touching the photograph gently. It had to come from understanding, from experience. Alexander had to learn compassion. You had to learn that running from wealth was as misguided as worshipping it. The chapel door opens, and Alexander enters quietly. The lawyers are here, he says. It's time to make our decision about the inheritance. Sarah looks at her brother, really looks at him, seeing now what Victoria saw all along. Two halves of a whole, each tempered by their separate journeys, ready now to unite their strengths. I know what Mother would say, Sarah says, touching the photograph. She'd say that true wealth isn't in the having or the rejecting, it's in the using, for others, for good. Alexander nods, understanding. And Father finally learned that lesson too late. But we have a chance to do what he couldn't, merge purpose with power, compassion with capability. Victoria watches her children with quiet satisfaction. Then you've made your decision? Brother and sister exchange a look of perfect understanding. In just one day, they've traveled light years from who they were this morning. The transformation is complete, but the real journey is just beginning. Yes, they say together, as Christmas Day draws to a close. We know exactly what we need to do. Outside the chapel windows, the snow has stopped, and the first stars of evening pierce through clearing skies. A new chapter is about to begin, not just for the Blackwood siblings, but for every life they'll touch with their unified purpose. Victoria's master plan has succeeded beyond even her hopes. Now it's time for the final act, the moment when everything changes not just for Hope Harbor, but for the entire landscape of how wealth and charity work together in service of humanity. Has someone's kindness changed your life? Share your story in the comments. The clock strikes midnight, marking the end of Christmas Day, as Sarah and Alexander stand before the assembled lawyers in Hope Harbor's community room. The shelter's Christmas tree glows softly in the corner, while residents and volunteers gather to witness what's about to unfold. We've made our decision, Alexander begins, his voice steady. He's removed his expensive suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, small gestures that represent a larger transformation. But first, we want everyone to understand exactly what this means. Sarah steps forward, holding their father's letter. 25 years ago, our father tried to fix his mistakes with money. Today, we're choosing a different path. She turns to face the crowd. Hope Harbor isn't just a shelter. It's a symbol of what happens when purpose meets possibility. Victoria watches from her seat, tears in her eyes, as her children prepare to reveal their choice. The combined Blackwood and Matthews fortunes, Alexander continues, amount to roughly $12 billion. By the terms of our father's will, we could take control of it all, or let it go to charity. He looks at Tommy and his mother, then at all the faces watching them, faces that just hours ago were strangers, but now feel like family. We choose neither option, a murmur runs through the crowd. The lawyers exchange confused glances. Instead, Sarah explains, we're creating something new. The Blackwood Matthews Foundation will be a different kind of charitable organization, one that doesn't just write checks from ivory towers. Alexander nods. Every dollar we invest will be matched by direct service. For every business decision, we'll spend time in the communities we aim to help. No more disconnected charity. This is about transformation from within. Starting with Hope Harbor, Sarah adds, this shelter won't just help the homeless. It will become a center for education, job training, and community building. Every person who comes through these doors will have the opportunity to not just receive help, but to become part of giving it. And the best part, Alexander smiles, is that we're not doing this alone. He gestures to the lawyers, who begin distributing documents. We're creating a new model of philanthropic investment. Every major corporation that works with Blackwood Enterprises will be required to participate, not just with money, but with real involvement. Victoria stands, her voice carrying years of emotion. This is what Richard hoped for, but could never imagine. Not just the joining of fortunes, but the joining of purpose. Tommy's mother wheels forward, tears streaming down her face. But what about the shelter? What happens to us? Sarah kneels beside her wheelchair. You're our foundation, quite literally. Hope Harbor will become the model for everything we build. And you, she takes the woman's hand, you'll help us design it. Because who better to create real solutions than those who've lived the challenges? Alexander joins them, starting with your treatment. But not just that, we're creating a medical fund for everyone here, and an education fund, and a housing program. But none of it is charity. It's investment in people, in potential, in transformation. The lawyers look bewildered at this unconventional approach, but Victoria's smile grows wider. This is exactly what she'd hoped for, her children finding a way to honor both their parents' legacies while creating something entirely new. There's one more thing, Sarah says, reaching for her brother's hand. Something we learned today that matters more than any amount of money. She looks at Victoria. Family isn't about blood or inheritance, it's about choice. About choosing to see the best in each other, to lift each other up, to serve something greater than ourselves. Alexander squeezes her hand. Today, we lost a fortune and gained a family. But more importantly, we found our purpose. Tommy runs up to them, hugging them both. Does this mean you're staying, Miss Sarah, and Mr. Alexander too? Sarah lifts the boy into her arms. We're all staying, Tommy. All of us. Because that's what family does. Victoria approaches her children, holding Catherine's old photograph of Hope Harbor. Your mother would be so proud, she tells Sarah. Both your mothers would be. As if in response, the Christmas tree lights seem to glow brighter. Outside, dawn begins to break over New York City, the first light of a new day, a new beginning. The lawyers begin packing up their papers, muttering about the unprecedented nature of what they've witnessed. But Sarah and Alexander hardly notice. They're too busy planning with the shelter's residents, already transforming concepts into reality. You know, Alexander says quietly to his sister, when I woke up yesterday, I thought I had everything figured out. Money, power, success, it all seemed so simple. Sarah smiles. And now? Now I realize that true wealth isn't what you have, it's what you give. Not just money, but yourself, your time, your understanding, your heart. That's the secret Mother knew all along, Sarah says, looking at Victoria. Why she spent 25 years planning this moment. Some lessons can't be taught, they have to be lived. Victoria joins her children, wrapping an arm around each of them. And some families aren't born, she adds softly. They're built. Through choice, through understanding, through love. Above them, the star atop the Christmas tree twinkles, casting light on the three faces below. Faces that reflect not just shared blood, but shared purpose. In their eyes shines the light of transformation, of understanding, of love that transcends all boundaries of wealth and circumstance. And in that moment, in a humble shelter on the morning after Christmas, the true meaning of wealth is finally understood. It's not about what you own, but about who you become and how many lives you touch along the way. Here's an engaging outro CTA that combines emotional connection, curiosity, and clear calls to action. What would you do with billions if you had to choose between wealth and purpose? Has someone's sacrifice ever changed your life completely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps our channel going, bringing you powerful stories that matter every single day. And if you're ready for another emotional journey that will keep you on the edge of your seat, click the video on the left.